Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was chosen as the protector of Themyscira. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The dust of the Gia's courtyard tasted of grit, effort, and a faint, coppery tang of blood. It was a taste Themyscira, now known to all on this island as Zealous, had come to associate with progress. He spat a mouthful onto the sun-baked earth and forced his trembling legs to lock into a ready stance, his breath hissing between clenched teeth. Across from him, Artemis stood like a bronze statue brought to life, her expression a mask of focused intensity. Every line of her powerful body was corded with muscle, her fiery red hair, braided tight, a stark banner against the brilliant blue of the Aegean sky. Her sword, a celestial bronze Xiphos, was an extension of her will, its edge humming with deadly purpose. Zealous's own blade, a practice weapon dulled for safety but still heavy enough to break bone, felt like a child's toy in comparison. "You're thinking too much again, scholar." Artemis's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear. "Your feet are 10 seconds behind your brain. In a real fight you'd be dead twice over." He didn't respond, couldn't spare the breath. He was already running the calculations. Her last 3 lunges initiated from her right foot. She favors a high guard when on the offensive, leaving a momentary opening at her hip. But she knows I know that. She's baiting me. The real attack will be a low sweep, intended to break my stance and follow with a pommel strike to the head. Predictable pattern. Except with her, the predictable is a feint for the unpredictable. His muttering was a low, almost inaudible thrum, a habit he'd never been able to break. It had earned him ridicule in his first few years here, but now, the Amazons who watched from the stone archways of the Colosseum knew it was the sound of his mind at work, a strange and alien form of battle. Trance. Artemis charged. She didn't run, she exploded across the 10 feet separating them, a blur of red and bronze. Just as his analysis predicted, her body coiled for a low sweep. It was the obvious, textbook move. Zealous's body screamed at him to dodge, to leap back, to do anything but what his mind was telling him to do. He ignored it. He held his ground, planting his feet firmly in the dirt. The low sweep was a phantom. Artemis's leg hissed through the air exactly where he would have been, but in the last microsecond, she used the momentum not to strike, but to pivot. Her entire body spun like a whirlwind, her sword now carving a vicious horizontal arc aimed directly at his neck. It was a move of breathtaking speed and lethality. It was a move he had been waiting for. Instead of trying to parry the blow, a fool's errand that would shatter his arm, Zealous dropped. He fell into a low crouch, the wind of her blade screaming over his head, close enough to snip a few wild strands of his dark green hair. As he dropped, he thrust his own sword forward, not as a weapon, but as a lever. The flat of his blade slammed against the inside of her leading ankle. It was a clumsy, desperate, and utterly unorthodox tactic. It wasn't about power or skill, it was about physics. Artemis, a warrior with centuries of experience, had accounted for every possible counterattack, every parry, every dodge. She had not accounted for her opponent simply collapsing and shoving a blunt object into her ankle while she was in the middle of a full-body rotation. Her perfect form shattered. With a startled grunt, she stumbled, her spin thrown off balance. It was the only opening he would get. Zealous surged upward, not with his sword, but with his body. He drove his shoulder into her midsection, wrapping his arms around her waist in a tackle that was more akin to a back-alley brawl than the elegant combat of the Amazons. The impact drove the wind from her lungs. For a single, glorious moment he had the advantage. He had the legendary Artemis, captain of the guard, on the defensive. The moment lasted precisely as long as it took for her to register the shock. Then, her body hardened like stone. An elbow, driven by the condensed power of a demigoddess, slammed down onto the back of his neck. The world exploded in a flash of white-hot pain. His vision swam with black spots, his grip slackened, and he found himself face down in the familiar dust once more, the weight of Artemis's boot pressing firmly between his shoulder blades. "Better," she conceded, her voice a low pant. She wasn't even out of breath. "You anticipated the feint within the feint. But you forgot what happens after." You won the engagement, Zealous, but you lost the fight. She removed her foot, offering him a hand. He took it, wincing as she hauled him to his feet with effortless strength. He was 16 now, taller and leaner than when he had arrived, his body a road map of scars from training exercises and the occasional run-in with a misbehaving chimera. But next to her, he still felt like a boy. My analysis was correct? He rasped, rubbing the back of his neck. But my body, it can't keep up with the execution speed. Your body is not the problem, Artemis said, her gaze softening almost imperceptibly. It was the highest form of praise he was ever likely to get from her. Your spirit is strong, stronger than any man I have ever heard of in the old stories. But you hesitate. You trust your mind, but you do not yet fully trust the vessel that carries it. She tapped his chest with 2 fingers. Here, that is where a battle is truly won. He nodded, bowing his head in respect. Thank you for the lesson, Captain. She gave a curt nod in return, the spar concluded. As she turned to leave, she paused. 6 years. For a child of man's world, born without the blessings of the gods, you have done well, Zealous. A warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the midday sun. It was a rare, precious thing, that sliver of acknowledgement from his harshest mentor. He watched her go, her powerful stride carrying her back toward the armory. 6 years? Sometimes it felt like a lifetime. Other times, it felt like yesterday that he had woken up on that impossible shore, a scared, quirkless 10-year-old a universe away from home. The taste of the courtyard dust suddenly shifted, becoming ash and ozone in his memory, and he was no longer Zealous, the Amazon in training. He was Izuku Midoriya, and he was having the worst day of his life. The doctor's words echoed in the sterile white room, colder and sharper than any surgeon's scalpel. He has 2 joints in his pinky toe. It's uncommon these days, but it's a clear indicator. He's part of the 20% of the population that is quirkless. I'm sorry, kid, it's not going to happen. That was it. The final nail in the coffin of a dream he had cherished since he was old enough to make a fist and whisper the words. I am here! In a shaky imitation of his idol. The drive home was a blur of his mother's frantic, whispered apologies. The time in his room was a silent, dark eternity, punctuated only by the endlessly looping video of All Might's debut, the hero's booming laughter now a cruel mockery. He's already saved 100 people. And he hasn't even been on the scene for 10 minutes. He's laughing. Izuku wasn't laughing. He was drowning. Later, his mother had stood at his doorway, her own eyes red-rimmed and puffy. I'm sorry, Izuku. She'd wept, the words he never wanted to hear. I'm so sorry. He hadn't wanted an apology. He had wanted her to say just one thing. You can still be a hero. But she hadn't. In that moment, he felt more alone than he ever had in his life. He had to get out. He had to breathe. He'd slipped out of the apartment, his bright red shoes a splash of defiant color against the drab gray of the Musitifa's cityscape. He walked without a destination, his special edition All Might, Silver Age figurine clutched in one hand, his Hero Analysis for the Future #1 notebook in the other. The pages, usually a source of comfort and purpose, felt heavy and useless, filled with the ramblings of a delusional child. He found himself in a narrow back alley, a shortcut between 2 shopping districts he often took. It smelled of stale ramen and damp concrete, and that's when he heard it, a man's panicked shout, and a low, grating laugh. Peeking around the corner, Izuku's blood ran cold. A man in a cheap suit was backed against a graffiti-covered wall. Towering over him was a villain, but not the kind you saw on TV. This wasn't a giant monster or a charismatic mastermind. This was a wiry man with greasy hair and a crazed look in his eyes, his clothes shabby and worn. His hands, however, were terrifying. They didn't seem to be fully attached to reality. The space around his fingers shimmered and distorted, like a heat haze on a summer road. Just give me the wallet, old man, the villain snarled, his voice cracking. Don't make me get messy. My quirk, it's not always precise. To prove his point, he waved a hand, and a chunk of the brick wall next to the civilian's head simply vanished, replaced by a swirling vortex of purple and black energy the size of a fist. It hummed with a sickening, discordant sound. The civilian was paralyzed with fear. Izuku was, too. His legs were frozen, his mind screaming at him to run, to hide, to call for a hero. But there are no heroes here, a small, determined voice whispered in his head. Just you. He was quirkless. Weak. A Deku useless. He couldn't do anything. He clutched the All Might figure in his hand, its plastic smile a stark contrast to his own terror. He looked at the man, then at the villain. He saw the shimmering portals opening and closing around the villain's hands, unstable and chaotic. The man was going to get hurt. Or worse. In that moment, the doctor's words, his mother's tears, his own despair, it all vanished, burned away by a single, incandescent thought that had been the bedrock of his entire existence. A hero saves people. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a quirk. He had a notebook and a toy. His arm moved on its own. With a choked sob that was half yell, half cry, he hurled the All Might figurine with all his might. It wasn't a powerful throw, but it was true. The plastic hero soared through the air in a perfect arc, glinting in the sliver of sunlight that pierced the alley. It struck the villain square on the side of the head. The man grunted in surprise, stumbling to the side. What the? His concentration broke. The tiny portals around his hands flickered and died. It was the opening the civilian needed. He shoved past the dazed villain and sprinted down the alley, scrambling for safety. Yes! Izuku whispered, a surge of pure, unadulterated joy flooding him. He did it. He saved someone. He really. The villain's head snapped in his direction. The crazed look in his eyes was now focused, and it was filled with a terrifying, homicidal rage. You little brat! He shrieked. You want to play hero? Let's see you save yourself! The villain thrust both hands forward. It wasn't the small, controlled portals from before. This was a gesture of pure, uncontrolled fury. The air in front of him didn't just shimmer, it tore open. A jagged, gaping maw of swirling, non-Euclidean chaos erupted in the middle of the alley, its hum now a deafening roar that vibrated in Izuku's bones. It pulled at him, a physical, irresistible suction. Loose gravel and trash were sucked into the vortex, vanishing without a trace. Izuku tried to run, but his feet felt like they were stuck in concrete. The pull was too strong. His notebook was ripped from his grasp, the pages fluttering wildly before being consumed by the void. He cried out, reaching for something, anything to hold on to, but there was only empty air. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of impossible colors and screaming sound. He felt a sensation like being flayed, his body stretched thin across dimensions he couldn't comprehend. He saw glimpses of stars being born and dying, of worlds made of crystal and fire, of faces that were not faces. There was no up or down, no past or future, only a terrifying, eternal now. His last coherent thought was a single, desperate cry that was ripped from his soul. Mom! And then, nothing. The first sensation was warmth. A gentle, blanketing warmth on his face, like the first real day of spring. The second was sound. A soft, rhythmic shushing, like a lullaby. The third was scent. Salt, a clean and bracing smell, mixed with the perfume of 1,000 flowers he had never known. Izuku's eyelids fluttered open. He was met with a sky of the most impossible, brilliant blue he had ever seen. A single, fluffy white cloud drifted lazily across his vision. He pushed himself up, his body aching as if he'd been run over by a truck. He was on a beach. The sand was impossibly white, the water a breathtaking turquoise that gently lapped at the shore. This wasn't Nizurifu. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through his disorientation. He scrambled to his feet, looking around wildly. Behind him, a lush, green jungle rose up, a wall of emerald and jade. In front of him, the ocean stretched to the horizon, empty and vast. There were no buildings, no cars, no people. Nothing. Hello? His voice was a weak croak. Is anyone there? Only the sound of the waves answered. He was alone. The villain, the portal. Had he been teleported somewhere? A remote island? Was he still in Japan? His hand brushed against something hard and lumpy in the sand. He looked down. It was his All Might figurine. It was horribly mangled, the paint scorched and peeling, one arm melted into a twisted stump, the iconic smile now a grotesque, blackened grimace. It looked as broken and battered as he felt. He snatched it up, clutching it to his chest as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. It was his last link to everything he knew. A fresh wave of tears welled in his eyes, hot and thick. He had saved that man, but it had cost him everything. He was lost. He was alone. And he just wanted his mom. He sank back to his knees, the sobs he'd been holding back finally breaking free, his small body shaking with the force of his grief and terror. He was so consumed by his despair that he didn't hear the soft crunch of sand behind him until the shadows fell over him. He looked up, his tear-filled eyes widening in shock. They were giants. Or at least, they seemed like it to a 10-year-old boy. 4 women stood before him, taller and more powerfully built than any woman he had ever seen. They were clad in gleaming bronze armor, shaped to their formidable physiques, with leather skirts and intricate bracers on their arms. They carried long spears with leaf-shaped points, and had swords strapped to their hips. Their faces were beautiful, like something carved from marble, but their expressions were hard, suspicious, and utterly intimidating. Izuku froze, his breath catching in his throat. They weren't speaking Japanese. The sounds they made were musical and flowing, but sharp and commanding, utterly alien to his ears. One of them, a woman with hair the color of midnight and eyes like chips of obsidian, pointed her spear at him. The bronze tip, glinting in the sun, was inches from his face. Pasinai Dinaton? Aina Agari? How is this possible? A boy, another, with blonde hair braided with gold, placed a restraining hand on the spear-wielder's arm. Her gaze was softer, more curious than hostile. Irima Alkipi. Inai Apla Inapaidi. Trofo Magmino. Easy Alcipi. He is just a child. A frightened one. Izuku understood none of it. All he saw were weapons, hard eyes, and no path of escape. He squeezed the burnt all-might figure tighter, a pathetic shield against an impossible threat. He tried to speak, to explain, but all that came out was a terrified stammer in his native tongue. Boboku wa. Doko disuka? Dare disuka? Where am I? Who are you? His Japanese words were met with confused, narrowed eyes. The language barrier was a wall as solid and insurmountable as any fortress. The woman with the spear barked another sharp command he didn't understand. Seeing no other option, Izuku did the only thing a lost, terrified 10-year-old could do. He held up his empty hands in a gesture of surrender, and began to cry again, his fear too overwhelming to contain. The sight of his tears seemed to change the dynamic. The blonde woman knelt, her expression softening into something like pity. She said something in a gentle, calming tone, but the words were still meaningless. She gestured for him to stand. Trembling, Izuku obeyed, clutching his ruined toy like a talisman. Surrounded by the 4 silent warriors, he was led away from the beach and into the deep, mysterious green of the jungle. The journey was a blur of awe and terror. They walked along a path that seemed to be made of polished white stone, winding through the most beautiful forest Izuku had ever imagined. The trees were ancient and colossal, their branches forming a high canopy that dappled the path with golden sunlight. Strange, vibrant flowers bloomed everywhere, and colorful birds he didn't recognize flitted between the trees, singing alien songs. But the beauty was overshadowed by the intimidating presence of his captors. More women appeared as they walked, emerging silently from the woods to watch him pass. They all had the same powerful builds, the same warrior's grace, the same suspicious eyes. Word of his arrival was clearly spreading. Whispers followed him, a river of incomprehensible words. Finally, they emerged from the trees, and Izuku's breath was stolen from his lungs. Before him lay a city. But it was like no city he had ever seen. It wasn't made of steel and glass, but of gleaming white marble and gold. Graceful towers soared into the sky, connected by elegant bridges. Grand amphitheaters and open-air courtyards were built in perfect harmony with the landscape, with waterfalls cascading down terraces and lush gardens blooming on every rooftop. It was a place from myth, a paradise he couldn't have dreamed of. He was led through the pristine streets, his dirty, tattered clothes and tear-streaked face a stark contrast to the city's perfection. Every woman he passed stopped and stared, their faces a mixture of shock, suspicion, and outright hostility. He felt like a piece of filth that had washed up in a sanctuary. His escort led him to the largest building of all, a magnificent palace with towering columns and a grand staircase that seemed to climb to the heavens. They marched him into a vast throne room, a hall so large it could have contained a dozen of his apartment buildings. It was open to the sky, and hundreds of armed women lined the walls, their gazes a heavy weight on his small frame. At the far end of the hall, upon a throne carved from a single piece of luminous white stone, sat a woman who could only be their queen. She was timeless, her beauty radiating a power and wisdom that went beyond mere mortal years. She wore elegant white robes and a golden circlet on her head, her long, dark hair flowing over her shoulders. Her eyes, a deep and piercing brown, held the weight of centuries. When she looked at him, Izuku felt as if she could see right through his skin and into his very soul. One of his escorts, the spear-wielder Alcippe, stepped forward and knelt, speaking in a loud, formal tone. She gestured at Izuku, her words painting a picture of his discovery on their shores. When she finished, a murmur rippled through the assembled warriors. A new figure strode forward from beside the throne. It was the red-haired woman from the training yard, Artemis, though she looked younger here, her face holding the same fierce intensity. She did not kneel. She spoke with a sharp, commanding voice, her words ringing with authority and conviction. She pointed a finger at Izuku. Eina ren. Estio nisi mas. O nomos inai zekatharos, vasilis amau. Prepe na phigi. I na pethanai. A male. On our island. The law is clear, my queen. He must be sent away. Or he must die. Though Izuku couldn't understand the words, the tone was unmistakable. The hostility, the condemnation, it was terrifying. Many of the other warriors nodded, their hands resting on the pommels of their swords. He was on trial, and he had already been judged guilty. He shrank back, trying to make himself as small as possible, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The queen held up a hand, and the hall fell silent. Her gaze never left Izuku. She studied him, not with the hostility of the others, but with a deep, contemplative curiosity. Her eyes lingered on his face, his tattered clothes, and finally, on the scorched plastic figurine he was clutching so tightly. She spoke, her voice calm but resonant with absolute authority. It was a sound that commanded obedience. She addressed Artemis, and though the words were gentle, they brooked no argument. Artemis bowed her head stiffly and stepped back, her displeasure radiating from her like heat. The queen, Hippolyta, descended the steps of her throne. The sea of warriors parted before her, as she walked toward him. She moved with a grace that was both regal and maternal. She stopped before him, looking down at the trembling, dirt-streaked boy who had somehow breached her island's magical borders. She saw the terror in his wide green eyes. She saw the tear tracks on his cheeks. She saw no malice, no threat, only a lost and profoundly broken child. And she remembered a faint whisper of a prophecy, an old verse from the oracle that spoke of a time of great peril, and of a savior who would not be of Amazon blood, a star-scorched child with a heart of green. She knelt before him, bringing herself down to his level. Izuku flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, she offered him a small, reassuring smile. She pointed to herself. Hippolyta, she said, her voice soft. Then she pointed to him, her expression a silent question. He understood. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. Izuku. Midoriya Izuku. The name meant nothing to her, of course. She saw the futility of it. Communication was impossible. And so, she would grant him a gift. A gift of understanding, so that she could pass her judgment. She reached out and gently placed her hand on his forehead. Izuku froze. Her touch was surprisingly warm. A soft, golden light emanated from her palm, and he felt a strange, tingling sensation spread through his mind. It wasn't painful. It felt like warm honey, like sunlight seeping into the dark corners of his brain. He felt a slight pressure, a subtle rearranging of thoughts and concepts. It was the ancient magic of Themyscira, a blessing from the gods that allowed all on the island to speak and understand one another. For a brief moment, the world swam, and then it settled clearer than before. Hippolyta removed her hand. She looked into his eyes, and when she spoke again, her voice was no longer a collection of alien sounds. He understood her as if she were speaking perfect Japanese. Do not be afraid, little one, she said, her tone now filled with a gentle, resonant compassion. You are safe here. Tell me, child from beyond the veil, who are you? The understanding was a shock, a sudden dam breaking in his mind. But it was her question that shattered his composure. All the terror of the portal, the loneliness of the beach, the fear of the throne room, it all coalesced into a single, overwhelming need. He wasn't in a mythical city, he wasn't standing before a queen. He was just a little boy who was lost and wanted to go home. His face crumpled, and fresh tears streamed down his cheeks. He looked up at the powerful queen, his voice a raw, pleading whisper that echoed in the silent, cavernous hall. Please, can I go home? The first year was a crucible of shame. Izuku Midoriya, the boy who had dreamed of standing beside heroes, could not even stand beside the youngest Amazon novitiates without stumbling. Themyscira was a paradise forged in discipline, a culture where physical perfection was not an aspiration but a baseline. And Izuku, by every conceivable metric, was flawed. His body, soft and unconditioned from a world of cities and schools, was a constant source of betrayal. The very air of the island, thick with a latent magic that invigorated the Amazons, seemed to press down on him, a constant reminder of his otherness. The archery range was a place of particular humiliation. He stood in a line of girls half his age, their forms a study in miniature perfection. They drew their bows with the fluid grace of dancers, their arrows flying true to whisper into the heart of distant targets. Then there was Izuku. His borrowed bow felt like an unwieldy beast in his hands. The string bit into his clumsy fingers, his arms trembled under the tension, and when he finally loosed an arrow, it would wobble through the air like a drunken hornet, more often than not burying itself in the turf a dozen paces short of the target. Laughter, at first, was his constant companion. It wasn't always cruel, more a sound of genuine, surprised amusement. The sight of the strange, green-haired boy tripping over his own feet during sword drills or nearly taking his own eye out with a bowstring was, to them, a bizarre spectacle. He moves like a newborn foal, all knees and elbows, one Amazon, Myrine, would jest. Less a foal, more a stunned fish on a dock, another would counter, and the laughter would ripple through the training grounds. He tried to hide his tears, but they always came at night, staining the simple linen pillow in his small, Spartan room in the palace annex. He was a Deku. A useless, clumsy boy. The name he had hated in his own world had, in a strange way, followed him here. He was once again the odd one out, the one who couldn't. But within the shame, a familiar spark refused to be extinguished. It was the same spark that had made him throw his all-might figurine in that alley. It was the core of his being, an analytical mind that saw failure not as an endpoint, but as a data point. He couldn't go home. Queen Hippolyta had explained it to him with a gentle sadness. The rift that brought him here was a chaotic, one-way tear in the fabric of reality. There was no map back, no known magic that could safely reopen such a wound. Themyscira was his home now. And if it was his home, he would not be useless within it, so he began to do what he had always done. He observed. He analyzed. He wrote. He couldn't find paper and pens, but the island provided. He learned to treat and stretch goat hide into workable parchment. He made ink from ground oak galls and charcoal. His first new notebook was clumsy and rough, but it was his. Hero Analysis for the Future was a dream of a forgotten world. This new volume he titled, simply, The Amazonian Method. He filled its pages with frantic, detailed sketches. He drew the proper archery stance, annotating it with notes on breath control, anchor points, and the physics of arrow trajectory. He diagrammed the footwork of Philippus, the general of the Amazon army, breaking down her flawless parries and riposts into a series of logical, repeatable steps. He studied the way Artemis generated impossible power from her hips and core, a kinetic chain of explosive energy. He began to improve. Not quickly, not gracefully, but with the grinding, stubborn persistence of water wearing away stone. His arrows started hitting the target, first the outer rings, then, eventually, the inner circle. His swordplay, while still lacking the innate warrior's instinct of his peers, became technically proficient. He learned to substitute raw strength with leverage and timing. He was still the weakest, the slowest, but he was no longer a complete joke. He was simply behind. For a boy who had spent his life being told he was starting from zero, being behind felt like a victory. 2 years after his arrival, when Izuku was 12, Princess Diana returned to the island. Her arrival was an event of pure joy. She descended from the sky in a craft of gleaming silver that was invisible to the naked eye, a marvel from man's world. The entire island celebrated, a festival of relief and love for their returned champion. Izuku watched from a distance, feeling more alien than ever. He had heard the stories. Diana, Wonder Woman, was Themyscira's greatest warrior, their ambassador to the world he had lost. She was everything he wasn't, a demigoddess, powerful, confident, beloved. He was sketching in his notebook in a secluded garden of the palace, analyzing the flight patterns of a native phoenix, when her shadow fell over him. "You must be Izuku." He jumped, dropping his charcoal stick. Standing before him was the princess herself. She was even more radiant in person, radiating a warmth and compassion that was almost overwhelming. She wasn't wearing her armor, but a simple white chiton, yet she still possessed an aura of undeniable power. Princess Diana," he stammered, scrambling to his feet and bowing low, his face burning with a flush of embarrassment. "It is an honor," she laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "Please, there's no need for such formality. My mother has written to me about you." The star-scorched child, her eyes, full of a wisdom that seemed to span eons, scanned his notebook. "Philippus told me you study everyone. She said your notes on her shield formations were so insightful, she incorporated one of your suggestions for defending against a flanking Gorgon." Izuku's eyes went wide. "As she did? She never told me." A thrill of pride, fierce and bright, shot through him. "She is not one for effusive praise," Diana said with a smile. "Neither is Artemis, I gather." Her smile turned a little wry. "I hear she calls you scholar." He flinched. "It's better than what they used to call me." Diana's expression softened. She sat on the marble bench beside him, a simple gesture that nonetheless made his heart pound. "I know this has not been easy for you. To be the only boy on an island of warrior women, to be born without the gifts of the gods, it is a heavy burden." Tears pricked at Izuku's eyes. He fought them back, ashamed to show such weakness in front of her. I want to be useful," he whispered, his voice thick. "I want to help. It's all I've ever wanted, but I'm not strong enough. I'm not fast enough. I'm not an Amazon." Diana was silent for a long moment, watching him. "When I first went to man's world," she said softly, "I was overwhelmed by the noise, the anger, the darkness. It was a world drowning in its own cynicism. But I also saw incredible things. People with no powers, no divine lineage, who would run into burning buildings to save a stranger. Doctors who would work for days without sleep to heal the sick. Scientists who dedicated their lives to expanding knowledge for the good of all." She gently took his notebook from his hands, flipping through the pages. She saw the detailed anatomical drawings, the complex strategic diagrams, the pages filled with his small, neat, obsessive script. "They had a different kind of strength," she continued, her eyes alight with understanding. "A strength of spirit. A relentless, passionate drive to improve, to understand, to protect. It is a fire I saw in the best of them." She tapped a page where he had written a detailed breakdown of how to perform a disarming maneuver. "And it is a fire I see in you, Izuku Midoriya. In abundance." She looked at him, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he felt truly seen. Not as a curiosity, not as a burden, but as an individual with his own unique worth. "You are right," she said. "You are not an Amazon. You were not born of this clay. But your spirit, your zeal, it is as strong as any I have ever encountered. That is a power all its own." She smiled, a brilliant, inspiring expression that reminded him so much of All Might and made his heart ache. "Izuku is the name of the boy you were. Perhaps it is time you had a name for the man you are becoming. In our ancient tongue, the word for this burning spirit, this divine ardor, is zealous." Zealous. He tasted the word. It felt strong. It felt like purpose. It was not the name of a quirkless, useless boy. It was the name of a spirit. His spirit. "Zealous," he repeated, his voice quiet but firm. A single tear escaped and traced a path through the dust on his cheek, but it was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of acceptance. From that day on, he was zealous. The name, gifted by the princess, carried weight. The teasing lessened, replaced by a grudging, curious respect. He was still the strange boy from another world, but now he had an identity that was forged on this island, not just a relic of the one he'd lost. The next few years were a blur of relentless, grueling work. Zealous's life found a new rhythm, revolving around 3 poles of instruction: the library, the strategy board, and the training yard. The Royal Library of Themyscira was his sanctuary. It was a living repository of millennia of knowledge, containing not just Amazonian history but also texts recovered from the great lost libraries of man's world and scrolls detailing the nature of gods and monsters. He devoured it all. He learned the weaknesses of every creature in the mythological bestiary, from the manticore's vulnerability to complex harmonic frequencies to the hydra's need for fire to seal its regenerating wounds. He committed to memory the epic poems that were, in fact, detailed battle reports of the gods' wars. He was no longer just analyzing what he could see. He was analyzing the accumulated wisdom of an entire civilization. With General Philippus, he honed his mind for war. She would lay out complex tactical scenarios on a massive sand table representing the island's terrain. A legion of centaurs makes landfall at the northern bay, she would say, her voice calm and even. Their archers have the range to pin down our forces on the beach. You have 2 squadrons of infantry and 1 of skirmishers. What is your command, Zealous? At first, his answers were bookish and impractical. He would propose complex flanking maneuvers that looked good on paper but failed to account for morale, or the chaos of battle. Philippus would patiently dismantle his plans, showing him where his logic failed. A soldier is not a game piece, Zealous. Her fear is a weapon the enemy will use against you. Your strategy must account for the heart, as well as the sword, he learned. He began to think in 3 dimensions, to see the battlefield not as a board, but as a living, breathing entity. His plans became more fluid, more adaptable, incorporating psychological tactics alongside physical ones. He learned that a feigned retreat could be more devastating than a frontal charge, and that control of high ground was control of the battle. Philippus began to nod more than she corrected, a silent affirmation of his growing strategic acumen. His training with Artemis remained the most physically punishing. There was no sand table here, only the hard-packed earth of the Gia's courtyard, the sting of a wooden practice sword against his ribs, and the taste of his own blood. Artemis did not coddle him. She saw the potential in his analytical mind, but believed it was useless if his body could not survive long enough to employ it. Your mind is a fine weapon, scholar, she would grunt, easily batting aside his carefully planned attack and sending him sprawling. But a sword does not win a war while it is still hanging on the forge wall. It must be tempered in fire. It must be beaten into shape. You must be beaten into shape, and she beat him. She taught him pain, endurance, and the primal, desperate will to get back up one more time than you are knocked down. He would end their sessions covered in bruises, his muscles screaming in protest. But every morning he would return, his notebook filled with new observations on her techniques, his body a little stronger, his resolve a little harder. The title scholar slowly shed its mocking tone and became something else, a descriptor, a grudging acknowledgement of his unique approach to their warrior world. He wasn't one of them, but he was undeniably one of their hardest working students. He was 15 when the harpy broke loose. It was a young one, captured for a controlled training exercise for the adolescent Amazons. Harpies were vicious, stupid creatures, but their aerial mobility and razor-sharp talons made them dangerous opponents, perfect for teaching the novitiates about fighting 3-dimensionally. The creature was meant to be contained within the training arena by a series of weighted nets, but it was larger and stronger than the scouts had reported. With a shriek of fury, it tore through a weak point in the netting and burst free into the open courtyard near the city's main aqueduct. Panic erupted. The young trainees scrambled back, their discipline momentarily forgotten in the face of a real, unrestrained threat. The harpy, disoriented and enraged, swooped low, its talons gouging deep furrows in the marble columns. Seasoned warriors were on the scene in moments. Artemis was there first, her bow already in hand, a celestial bronze arrow nocked and ready. "Hold your positions! Form a perimeter!" she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Drive it toward the sea cliffs." Her strategy was sound. forced the creature into an open area where it couldn't use the city's architecture for cover. Several Amazons loosed arrows, but the harpy was erratically fast, jinking and diving through the air. The arrows either missed or glanced harmlessly off its strangely dense feathers. One warrior threw a weighted net, but the harpy tore it to shreds with its beak. Zealous was there, having been observing the training exercise for his notes. While others saw a monster to be subdued, he saw a problem to be solved. His mind raced, sifting through hundreds of pages of text he had read in the library. Bestiary, Volume 9, Avian Monstrosities. Harpies. Subspecies, Cretan cliff screecha. Feathers contain a high level of keratin and metallic deposits, making them resistant to piercing. Talons can rend bronze. Weaknesses: poor ground mobility, susceptible to. The memory clicked into place. An obscure footnote in a treatise by an ancient Amazonian naturalist. The creature's auditory senses are its greatest strength and most profound weakness. Their hollow bone structure, necessary for flight, resonates painfully with specific high-frequency sonics, causing severe spatial disorientation and nausea. Artemis was preparing for another volley. Archers, aim for the wing joints. Cripple its flight, she yelled. It was a brutal but effective strategy. It would also likely kill or permanently maim the creature. Zealous saw another way. Captain, wait! He shouted, his voice cracking with urgency. He ran forward, positioning himself between the archers and the harpy. Artemis rounded on him, her eyes blazing with fury. Scholar, get out of the way. This is not a damn study session. Don't shoot. He pleaded, his heart hammering in his chest. They're bones. They're hollow. They resonate. What in Hera's name are you babbling about? She snarled, shoving him roughly aside. There was no time to explain. He had to show them. Zealous frantically looked around, spotting a patch of tall, hollow reeds growing by a decorative fountain. He yanked two of them free, quickly using a small knife he kept for sharpening his charcoal to carve a notch into one of them. It was a crude attempt at a shepherd's flute, something he'd read about in a text on ancient music. The harpy shrieked and dove again, this time straight for a group of huddled trainees. Artemis cursed and drew her bowstring taut, the arrowhead glowing with faint power. She was going for the kill shot. No! Zealous screamed. He put the reed to his lips and blew with all his might. It wasn't music. It was a noise, a piercing, impossibly high-pitched whistle that grated on the ears of everyone present. The Amazons winced, covering their ears, but the effect on the harpy was immediate and catastrophic. The creature's dive faltered. It wobbled in the air as if drunk, its shrieks turning from rage to pain. It flapped its wings erratically, losing altitude, its head shaking violently from side to side. The high-frequency sound was vibrating through its entire skeleton, scrambling its senses, turning its own body into an instrument of torture. Zealous didn't let up. He poured every ounce of breath he had into the reed, the note rising in pitch until it was almost beyond human hearing. With a final, agonized squawk, the harpy crashed to the ground. It lay there, twitching and stunned, its wings tangled and its eyes rolling in their sockets. It was completely incapacitated, defeated not by a sword or an arrow, but by a sound. Silence fell over the courtyard, broken only by Zealous's ragged gasping for air as he dropped the reed. The Amazons stared, dumbfounded. They looked from the twitching monster to the panting, nondescript boy who had felled it. Artemis slowly, deliberately unknocked her arrow. She walked over to the downed harpy, her expression unreadable. After confirming it was subdued, she turned and strode toward Zealous. He braced himself for a reprimand, for being punished for his insubordination. She stopped in front of him, her shadow covering him completely. For a long moment she just looked at him, her gaze intense, analytical, reassessing everything she thought she knew about him. Explain, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a command. He swallowed, finding his voice. The library, he managed to say. A footnote in Philomena's Bestiarium Minor. The hollow bone structure of Cretan harpies creates a resonant frequency. It scrambles their equilibrium. It doesn't harm them permanently. Artemis stared at him for another second, then a slow, thin smile touched her lips. It was not a smile of warmth, but of profound, grudging respect. She clapped a hand on his shoulder, her grip like iron, and it was the first time she had ever touched him outside of combat training. "You saved the trainees from injury," she stated, her voice loud enough for all to hear. "You subdued the creature without needless bloodshed. And you avoided a great deal of damage to the aqueduct." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a low murmur only he could hear. "You did not use your body, scholar. You used your mind. And today, it was the sharpest weapon on this island." She released him and turned to the other warriors. "The situation is contained. A lesson for all of you: strength is not always the answer. Knowledge is a weapon. Do not neglect it." As the Amazons moved to secure the groaning harpy, Zealous stood there, his shoulder aching from Artemis's grip. He was still just a boy, still physically weaker than the youngest of them, but in that moment, as the warriors of Themyscira looked at him with a new light in their eyes, he felt, for the first time, like he truly belonged. He was Zealous of Themyscira, and his training was just beginning. The salt spray felt different today. Zealous stood on the black volcanic rock of the northern watchpoint, the wind whipping his dark green hair across his face. For 6 years, this wind had been a familiar companion, a clean, wild thing that spoke of open seas and the timeless magic of his adopted home. Today, it carried a taint, a subtle, sickly sweet undertone that clung to the back of the throat, like the smell of rot masked by perfume. "Anything?" Artemis's voice was a low growl beside him, her eyes sharp as a hawk's, scanning the turbulent line where the turquoise water met the horizon. She stood with her feet planted wide, a living statue of bronze and coiled muscle, utterly at ease on the treacherous, wind-swept perch. "The wind is wrong," Zealous replied, his own gaze fixed on the churning waves below. He wasn't gifted with the demigod senses of his companion, but his analytical mind had been trained to notice patterns, and this was a deviation. "And the gulls are silent. They've been silent since dawn." Artemis grunted, a sound of grudging agreement. She had noticed it too. The boisterous seabirds that normally wheeled and cried over these cliffs were gone, their absence a screaming silence that was more unsettling than any storm. They were on a routine patrol, a punishment detail for Zealous after he'd accidentally proven that a specific sequence of shield strikes could create a resonant frequency capable of cracking a marble training dummy in half, and unfortunately, also shattering a nearby window in the palace kitchens. Artemis had volunteered to supervise him with grim enthusiasm. For an hour, they had seen nothing but waves and rock. Then Zealous saw it. A dark shape, bobbing in the surf, being carried toward a small, secluded cove at the base of the cliffs. "There," he said, pointing. "Something in the water." Artemis's eyes narrowed to slits. With a grace that defied gravity, she began to descend the cliff face, finding handholds and footholds that seemed invisible to Zealous. He followed, his own descent far more clumsy and cautious, his fingers gripping the cold, damp rock until his knuckles were white. By the time he reached the black sand of the cove, Artemis was already standing over the thing that had washed ashore. The sickly sweet smell was stronger here, a nauseating miasma. It might have been a shark once. The basic shape was there, the sleek, torpedo-like body, the dorsal fin, the powerful tail. But it was horribly, fundamentally wrong. Its skin was not the smooth gray of a living creature, but a mottled, bruised purple, covered in pulsing, yellow pustules that seemed to weep a foul-smelling ichor. Jagged, crystalline spikes, like shards of smoky quartz, jutted from its back at unnatural angles. Its jaw was unhinged, filled not with teeth, but with a writhing mass of what looked like pale, fleshy tentacles. The creature's dead eyes were milky white, but deep within them, a faint, malevolent green light still flickered, a dying ember of some unnatural energy. Zealous felt a wave of nausea. He had seen death. He had helped hunt the beasts of the island and had dressed their kills for the evening meal. This was not death. This was a desecration of it. This was something that had been alive, then killed, then twisted into a parody of life by a force of pure malice. "What is it?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Corruption," Artemis said, her voice grim. She nudged the creature's flank with the toe of her sandal, and the flesh dissolved into a foul, greasy slush. "This is the third one this month. The first was a dolphin, its body swollen with tumors that spelled out curses in the old tongue. The second was a sea turtle, its shell grown into the shape of a screaming face. She looked out at the ocean, her gaze hard. The magical barrier that shields Themyscira from the outside world, the veil that keeps us hidden and safe, it's weakening. This filth is seeping through the cracks. Zealous looked at the monstrous carcass, and then up at the towering cliffs and the gleaming city beyond. He thought of the laughter in the communal halls, the quiet dedication in the libraries, the fierce pride in the training yards. This was his home. This corruption, this poison, was a direct threat to it all. A cold, determined anger began to burn away his nausea. This was not a puzzle to be analyzed from a distance. This was an enemy at the gates. We have to report this to the queen, he said. Artemis was already turning to go, her jaw set. And the oracle, she added, her tone heavy with dread. She will have already felt this abomination's arrival. I fear the time for whispers and portents is over. The council chamber of Themyscira was a place of profound and intimidating beauty. It was not a dark, enclosed room of stone, but an open-air rotunda supported by soaring columns of ivory-white marble. The sky itself was its ceiling. In the center of the polished floor was a mosaic of lapis lazuli and gold, depicting the known constellations. Here, under the watchful eyes of the gods and the heavens, the fate of the Amazons was decided. Queen Hippolyta sat upon her simple, elegant throne, her expression serene but etched with a deep, underlying concern. Flanking her were her most trusted advisers, General Philippus, her face a mask of stoic duty, her hand resting on the pommel of her sword, Menelip, the high priestess, her eyes closed in quiet communion with the gods, and Cleo, the royal scribe and historian, her fingers steepled before her, her mind a living library of their people's long history. And in the center of the room, before the throne, stood the Pythia, the oracle of Themyscira. She was an ancient woman, her eyes a milky white, unseeing of the physical world but staring deep into the roiling currents of fate. She swayed, her breath coming in ragged hisses, her body a conduit for a power far older than the island itself. Zealous stood at the edge of the rotunda with Artemis, a silent observer. As a ward of the queen, he was occasionally permitted to attend these councils, to listen and to learn. Today, he felt less like a student and more like a defendant awaiting a verdict. The image of the corrupted shark was burned into his mind. It has begun. The oracle's voice was a dry, rasping sound, like dead leaves skittering across stone, yet it filled the vast chamber. The veil thins. The waters grow sour. The thirsting god stirs in his cage of ages. A heavy silence followed her words. The thirsting god. Ares. The god of war, their eternal nemesis, imprisoned millennia ago after a cataclysmic war that had nearly torn the world asunder. The shadow of his helmet falls upon our shores, the oracle continued, her sightless eyes turning in the direction of the sea. He seeks to poison paradise from without, for he cannot touch it from within. His whispers ride the currents, twisting life into weapons, turning the sea to blood. He seeks to break our spirit before he breaks our walls. Philippus shifted her weight, the sound of her leather armor creaking loud in the stillness. Our walls have never been broken, Pythia. Our warriors have never been defeated. This is not a war of spears and shields, General, the oracle hissed. Not yet. It is a war of attrition, a siege of the soul. He sends these abominations as a message. A promise. War is coming to Themyscira. A war of a magnitude not seen since the great betrayal. Queen Hippolyta's gaze was steady, her regal calm a rock in a stormy sea. Then we shall be ready. We will double the patrols, fortify the watchtowers. The barrier will be reinforced with every ritual at our command. It will not be enough, the Pythia stated, her voice devoid of hope. Rituals can mend a tear, but they cannot stop the blade that made it. Ares's will is a divine weapon, and it is carving away at the foundations of our sanctuary. We need more than a shield. We need a sword. We need a champion. Cleo, the historian, looked up. The champion is Princess Diana. She fights for us in man's world. Princess Diana is our ambassador, Hippolyta corrected gently, her voice carrying a profound weight of history. She is the bridge between our world and theirs. Her duty is to show them the path to peace. But the role I speak of is older, more fundamental. We do not need a messenger to the world. We need a guardian for our home. A protector, bound to the island itself. She rose from her throne, her white robes flowing around her as she walked to the center of the celestial mosaic. She gestured to the assembled council. For centuries, this island has known peace. We have grown complacent. We have forgotten some of the old ways, the sacred rites forged in the fires of our most desperate hours. There is a covenant, an ancient pact between the first queen and the gods of Olympus. In a time of existential peril, a champion may be chosen to stand as the living embodiment of Themyscira's will to survive. Her gaze swept over them all, landing for a fleeting moment on Zealous. This champion is granted a divine blessing, a vessel of power passed down through generations. It is called the Aegis of Heracles. A collective gasp went through the chamber. Even Artemis's stoic expression wavered, her eyes widening in awe. The Aegis of Heracles was a legend, a myth whispered to young novitiates. It was said to be a fragment of the divine power of Heracles himself, gifted to the Amazons after his 9th labor, a relic of immense, untamable strength. It has lain dormant for over 1,000 years, Hippolyta continued, her voice resonating with power. It rests in the sealed chamber of the first temple, waiting for a heart strong enough to bear its burden and a spirit pure enough to wield its fire. The protector is not merely a warrior. They are the island's immune response, its final, ultimate defense. Their strength becomes the island's strength. Their will becomes the island's will. She stopped, her regal face set with grim determination. The oracle has spoken. Ares is at our door. The time has come to awaken the Aegis. The empty throne of the protector must be filled. Philippus was the first to speak, her voice ringing with clarity. How is this protector to be chosen, my queen? By the old ways, Hippolyta declared, her voice echoing off the marble. By a trial of spirit, a trial of wisdom, and a trial of combat. A tournament will be held, open to any Amazon who believes her heart is true and her will is strong enough to answer the call. Her eyes found Artemis, and a silent understanding passed between them. Let the word go forth. Let all who would be champion prepare themselves. The trials for the protector of Themyscira will begin at the next full moon. The news spread through the city like a wildfire. The solemnity of the council chamber gave way to a feverish, electric excitement in the courtyards and training grounds. The threat of Ares was real and terrifying, but to a society of warriors, the announcement of a grand tournament was a call to glory that resonated in their very souls. The name on everyone's lips was Artemis. It can only be her, Zealous overheard one Amazon say as she sharpened her sword in the armory. Who else has the strength? The skill? The experience? She was born for this, her companion agreed, polishing her shield until it shone like the sun. She has the spirit of a true warrior, unburdened by sentiment. She will be a protector to make our ancestors proud. Zealous sat by himself in the mess hall, pushing a piece of roasted fish around his plate, his appetite gone. He listened to the boisterous talk, the confident declarations, the friendly wagers being placed on how quickly Artemis would dominate the trials. It was a foregone conclusion. She was their greatest warrior on the island, their captain, their paragon of martial virtue, and they were right. Logically, Artemis was the perfect and only choice. But as Zealous listened, a cold dread coiled in his stomach that had nothing to do with the corrupted shark or the threat of Ares. It was the memory of Artemis's words as they stood over that monstrosity. Corruption. It was her strategy against the escaped harpy. Aim for the wing joints! Cripple its flight! Artemis was a sword. A perfect, beautiful, deadly sword. She met force with greater force. She met monstrosity with lethal efficiency. But the thing on the beach, it hadn't just been a monster, it had been a victim. A creature twisted by a power that thrived on pain and despair. Zealous wondered if a sword was the right tool to fight a poison. A poison needed an antidote. A disease needed a cure. You're overthinking it, he told himself, stabbing at his fish. This is a problem of strength. The protector needs to be strong enough to fight a god. That is Artemis. It is not you. He was no one. A foundling. The scholar. A boy who won a fight with a whistle. His greatest weapons were a charcoal stick and a piece of stretched goatskin. To even think of putting his name forward was not just arrogant, it was laughable. He could picture it now, the stunned silence, followed by the explosion of incredulous laughter. It would be the ultimate joke. The quirkless, clumsy boy from another world, vying for the title of their divine protector. He would be humiliated. He pushed his plate away and fled the hall, the sounds of confident laughter chasing him out into the cool night air. He found his way to his sanctuary, the library. He lit a single oil lamp, its golden glow pushing back the shadows, and unrolled his latest notebook. He stared at the blank page, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. Need, a protector for Themyscira. Threat, Ares. Corruption. A war of spirit. Candidate A, Artemis. Strengths, unmatched combat prowess, centuries of experience, unyielding will, respected leader. Weaknesses, lacks flexibility and strategy, tends toward overwhelming force, might underestimate a non-physical threat. Candidate B, zealous. Strengths, he stopped. He couldn't write anything. What were his strengths? An analytical mind? A good memory for obscure bestiary footnotes. The ability to endure Artemis's beatings? In this context, they were nothing, useless. A wave of his old despair washed over him, the familiar feeling of being utterly, hopelessly inadequate. He was Deku again. Powerless. A spectator in a world of heroes. He slammed the notebook shut. He couldn't do it. It was impossible. He would just be a fool. His duty was to help in the way he knew how, from the sidelines, with his books and his observations. He would analyze the trials and give his notes to Artemis. That was his role. That was his place. A troubled mind finds little comfort in the dark, zealous. The voice, calm and steady as a mountain, made him jump. General Philippus stood in the archway of the library, her form silhouetted against the moonlit courtyard. She walked toward him, the soft soles of her sandals making no sound on the marble floor. General, he said, quickly standing and bowing his head. I'm sorry, I was just studying. You were wrestling, she corrected gently, her wise eyes taking in his troubled expression and the discarded notebook. And it appears you are losing. She stopped beside his table and looked down at the title he had written and then crossed out, Trials of the Protector, Analysis and Strategy. Everyone believes Artemis will be chosen, Zealous said quietly, stating the obvious. Belief is not the same as destiny, Philippus replied. Artemis is our finest warrior. Her spear is the sharpest, her shield the strongest. If the role of protector was simply greatest warrior, there would be no need for trials. The aegis would have been given to her already. Zealous looked up at her, confused. But isn't it? The aegis of Heracles is not a prize to be won, the general explained, her gaze distant, as if looking back through the centuries. It is a burden to be accepted. It is a divine power that bonds with a mortal soul. Strength of arm is necessary to wield it, but it is strength of character that is required to survive it. The trials are not designed to find the strongest fighter. They are designed to find the truest heart. She looked at him, her expression serious. I have trained you for 4 years, Zealous. I have seen you fail more times than any student I have ever had. I have seen you fall, and I have seen you bleed, but I have never, not once, seen you quit. I have seen you memorize our laws, not because you were commanded to, but because you wished to understand our justice. I have seen you spend weeks learning the proper way to bind a wound, not for a trial, but because a novitiate had scraped her knee. Your body may have been forged in man's world, but your heart was forged here, on Themyscira. It is a true heart. Zealous was speechless. Praise from Philippus was rarer than a snowfall on the island. The protector is not the island's sword, she continued, her voice a low, powerful murmur. Princess Diana is our sword, which we show to the world. The protector is our shield. Not a shield of bronze that deflects a blow, but a shield of spirit that endures, that protects, that heals the wounds beneath. A shield that understands the nature of the poison it is defending against. She nodded toward the door. You saw that creature on the beach. You know this is not a simple war. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm and reassuring. Do not ask yourself if you can win, Zealous. Ask yourself if you can stand by and do nothing when your home is threatened. Ask yourself if your spirit calls you to this duty. The rest is for the gods to decide. With a final, encouraging nod, she turned and left him alone in the quiet lamplight. Her words echoed in his mind. The truest heart. a shield of spirit. He looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred from his years of training. They weren't the hands of a great warrior, but maybe they were the hands of a protector. He was still afraid. The thought of the inevitable mockery still made his stomach churn. But Philippus had given him a new perspective. This wasn't about winning. It was about answering a call. It was about offering what little he had in service of the home that had taken him in. He might fail. He would probably fail. But he would not be a coward. He would not hide in the library while others fought for their world, for his world. He picked up his charcoal stick. He opened the notebook again to the blank page. With a steady hand he rewrote the title, Trials of the Protector, A Path to Victory. The great hall was filled to capacity, the evening meal a boisterous, energetic affair. The air buzzed with talk of the upcoming trials. Warriors debated the nature of the challenges, boasting of their own prowess, and proclaiming their unwavering support for Captain Artemis. Artemis herself sat at the head table alongside Philippus and the other commanders, accepting the adulation with a stern, focused grace. She was not reveling in the attention. She was already in the mindset of the competition, her focus an almost palpable force field around her. Zealous took a deep breath, his heart feeling like a trapped bird beating against his ribs. He walked from his small table at the back of the hall toward the raised dais where the queen sat. Every step felt like wading through thick mud. Conversations quieted as he passed, heads turning, eyes following the strange boy with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. He reached the foot of the dais and knelt, as was proper. "My queen," he said, his voice clearer and louder than he expected it to be. The entire hall fell silent. All eyes were on him. He could feel the weight of their collective gaze like a physical pressure. Hippolyta looked down at him, her expression calm and unreadable. "Zealous. You have something to say before this assembly?" He rose to his feet, his knees trembling slightly. He did not look at the sea of faces staring at him. He kept his eyes fixed on his queen. "I do, my queen," he said, his voice steady. "I have heard the proclamation. I have considered the words of the oracle and the wisdom of the council." He took one last, steadying breath. "I, Zealous, ward of Themyscira, formerly a Zuccomidaria of an unknown world, wish to formally enter my name as a candidate in the trials for the Protector." For a single, solitary second, there was a stillness so profound he could hear the blood roaring in his own ears. Then, the laughter started. It wasn't a few scattered titters. It was a wave, a roar of unrestrained, incredulous hilarity that crashed over him. It started at one table and spread through the hall like a contagion, growing in volume until the very rafters seemed to shake with it. Warriors were slapping their knees, wiping tears of mirth from their eyes. "The scholar?" one shouted, her voice choked with laughter. "He thinks this is a test? Maybe the trial of wisdom is a written exam." Another howled, prompting a fresh wave of guffaws. "I hope the trial of combat involves identifying mythical beasts from a set of drawings." Each jeer was a physical blow. Zealous felt his face burn with a humiliating heat. His carefully constructed resolve began to crumble. This was exactly as he had feared. He was a joke. An object of ridicule. He wanted to run, to disappear, to vanish back into the shadows of the library, but then he looked past the laughing crowd. He saw Philippus, who was not laughing. She was watching him with a small, proud smile, and she gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. He looked at the head table. Artemis was not laughing either. Her face was a mask of thunderous fury. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the handle of her dagger. Her eyes blazed with a complex emotion. It was insult, it was disbelief, but underneath it all, there was a flicker of something else, a sharp, challenging glint. She wasn't laughing at him. She was furious that he would dare make a mockery of their most sacred right. And finally, he looked at Queen Hippolyta. Her expression had not changed. She remained serene, a bastion of calm in the storm of ridicule. But her eyes, there was something in her eyes, a deep, ancient knowing. A flicker of profound interest, as if she were seeing a piece of a grand puzzle finally clicking into place. She was not surprised. Her gaze gave him strength. He straightened his back, lifted his chin, and stood his ground, letting the waves of laughter wash over him. He would not break. He would not run. He was zealous, and he had made his choice. Hippolyta raised a single hand. Instantly, the laughter died, replaced by a sheepish, expectant silence. "The trials are open to any who feel the call," the Queen declared, her voice ringing with finality. "Your entry is accepted, Zealous. Prepare yourself." She gave him a nod of dismissal. He bowed once more and turned to walk back to his table, his back straight, his eyes forward. The whispers followed him now, no longer laughing, but buzzing with confusion and disbelief. He did not go back to his seat. He walked straight out of the great hall, into the cool embrace of the night. He did not go to the library. He went to a small, secluded training ground behind the armory, a place he often used when he wanted to be alone. The moonlight cast long shadows on the hard-packed earth. He could still hear the faint echo of the laughter in his ears, but it no longer had the power to wound him. It was just noise. The opinions of others were just data points, variables to be accounted for, but not the mission itself. He knelt and unrolled a fresh sheet of parchment. He lit a small lantern, its light a tiny pool of defiance in the vast darkness. He picked up his charcoal stick, the familiar weight of comfort in his hand. The battle would not begin in the tournament arena. It began here. It began now. He would not outfight Artemis. He would not overpower her. He would have to outthink her. He would have to analyze every possible permutation of the trials, find every weakness, every loophole, every alternative path to victory. His charcoal stick began to move, scratching furiously across the parchment under the silent, watchful gaze of the moon. Objective, survive and advance through the trials. Strengths, analysis, endurance, unconventional thinking. Weaknesses, everything else. First step, define the parameters of wisdom, spirit, and combat. The real trial isn't the opponent. It's the test itself. He was alone, outmatched, and ridiculed. And he had never felt more like a hero in his life. The day of the first trial dawned gray and brooding. A thick, pearlescent mist rolled in from the sea, blanketing Themyscira in a soft, ethereal silence. It was an omen, the whispers in the barracks said, a sign that the gods themselves were watching, holding their breath. Zealous stood with the other 19 aspirants at the foot of Mount Eryx, the tallest peak on the island. The air was cool and damp, and he shivered, though not from the cold. He was a stark anomaly in the line of competitors. They were a legion of demigoddesses, the pinnacle of Amazonian martial prowess, clad in lightweight leather armor, their bodies honed to perfection. He was a lean, wiry boy in a simple tunic, his only weapon the weight of the knowledge he carried in his head. The mockery had subsided in the weeks leading up to the trials, replaced by a cold, dismissive indifference. He was no longer a joke. He was an irrelevance, a footnote in the grand saga of Artemis's ascension. Artemis herself stood at the head of the line, a pillar of fiery confidence. She hadn't spoken a word to him since his declaration, but he felt her gaze on him occasionally, sharp, appraising, and utterly contemptuous. Queen Hippolyta addressed them from a raised platform, her voice cutting through the mist. Aspirants! The path to the Aegis is not a race to a finish line, but a journey into the self. The protector must be more than strong, they must be wise. Today, you face the trial of wisdom, the labyrinth of Antiope. She gestured toward the base of the mountain, where a massive, 20-foot-tall hedge of dark, thorny vines formed a single, ominous archway. The air around it shimmered with a faint magical aura. Our great ancestor, Queen Antiope, was not only a warrior but a brilliant strategist and philosopher, Hippolyta explained. She designed this labyrinth not to trap the body, but to test the mind. It is a shifting maze, its corridors rearranging themselves according to the thoughts of those within. Brute force will not find you the exit. Impatience will be your cage. Logic, observation, and a calm heart are your only guides. The first 10 to emerge from the exit on the far side of the mountain before sundown will advance to the next trial. The rest will be eliminated. Enter, and may the gods grant you clarity. A low horn blew, and the trial began. With a collective war cry, most of the Amazons, led by a roaring Artemis, charged into the labyrinth's entrance. Their strategy was clear: speed and aggression. They would overwhelm the maze with sheer momentum. Zealous did not join them. He stood back, watching them disappear into the green maw, his hand resting on the small leather pouch at his belt. Philippus had told him the labyrinth tested the mind, and his mind worked best with data. He wasn't going to run into a problem. He was going to dissect it first. He walked along the outer wall of the maze, his eyes scanning the dense, thorny foliage. It seemed impenetrable, a solid wall of green, but his studies had taught him that even the most potent Amazonian magic had rules, and internal logic. He recalled a passage from Antiope's own writings. All that is woven can be unwoven. All that is built follows a design. The trick is not to see the walls, but to perceive the thread of the weaver's hand. He found what he was looking for after 10 minutes of careful searching. A single, almost imperceptible silver vine, no thicker than a thread, was woven into the dark green tapestry of the hedge. It pulsed with a faint, rhythmic light, like a slow heartbeat. This was it. The thread of the weaver's hand. The magical conduit that controlled the labyrinth's shifting nature. He took a small piece of charcoal from his pouch and made a mark on the stone ground where the silver vine entered the maze. Then he entered. Inside, the labyrinth was a disorienting, claustrophobic world of rustling leaves and identical green corridors. The mist was thicker here, muffling sound and creating a sense of profound isolation. He could hear the frustrated shouts of other Amazons echoing from distant, unseen passages. They were already getting lost, their aggressive energy causing the maze to shift and turn against them. Zealous ignored the urge to rush. He walked at a steady, deliberate pace, his eyes not on the path ahead, but on the walls themselves. Every few feet he would spot the faint, pulsing glimmer of the silver vine. It was the maze's lifeblood. As long as he could follow it, he would be following the core structure, the master blueprint that the shifting walls were built upon. After an hour, he came to a dead end. A solid wall of thorns blocked his path. He could hear an Amazon on the other side cursing in frustration. A moment's panic flared in his chest. Had he been wrong? He calmed himself, forcing his breathing to slow. Logic, observation, and a calm heart. He looked closer at the silver vine. Here, at the dead end, it branched. One strand continued into the thorny wall, but another, thinner strand veered sharply to the right, disappearing into what looked like a solid hedge. It was a test. A choice between the obvious path and the hidden one. He trusted his theory. Placing his hands on the hedge where the thinner vine led, he pushed. His hands met not thorns, but empty air. The wall was an illusion. He stepped through and found himself in a new, clear corridor. The main silver vine was once again at his feet. He continued on, his confidence growing. The labyrinth threw more challenges at him. Corridors that looped back on themselves, passages that seemed to lead upwards into thin air, chambers filled with disorienting optical illusions. Each time, he ignored the grand deception and focused on the simple, constant truth of the silver vine. He encountered another Amazon, a fierce warrior named Ubia, who was trapped in a circular chamber with 3 identical exits. She was growing frantic, running into one exit, only to emerge from another a moment later. "This is madness," she snarled as Zealous entered. "A witch's trick. There is no escape. The walls are lying to you," Zealous said calmly. "Don't look at the doors. Look at the floor." He pointed to the base of the left-hand exit, where the silver vine glowed faintly before passing through. Ubia stared, her eyes widening in comprehension. She nodded her thanks and sprinted through the correct door, disappearing. Zealous smiled. He wasn't just navigating the maze, he was reading it. Understanding its language. Several hours later, he saw a change in the light ahead. The green walls gave way to a final archway, framing the gray, misty sky. He had reached the exit. He stepped out onto the far side of the mountain, his lungs filling with fresh, clean air. He was not the first. Artemis was already there, pacing like a caged tiger, her armor scratched and her hair filled with leaves. Ubia and 3 other Amazons were also present, all of them looking exhausted and frustrated. "How?" Artemis demanded as he emerged, her voice sharp with suspicion. "You were the last to enter." "I ran the entire way. I smashed through 3 false walls and climbed another." "How did you get here before the others?" "You fought the maze, Captain," Zealous said, catching his breath. "I listened to it." Artemis just scowled, unconvinced. But as the hours ticked by and the sun began its descent, her scowl deepened. Only 2 more Amazons emerged before the deadline. The 10th and final spot was taken by an Amazon who stumbled out just as the horn blew to signal the end of the trial, collapsing in exhaustion. 10 aspirants, including Zealous, had been eliminated. He had not only survived, he had placed 6th ahead of warriors with 10 times his speed and strength. As he looked back at the silent, brooding labyrinth, he felt a quiet surge of validation. He may not have an Amazon's body, but he had a scholar's mind. And today, that had been enough. The second trial took place 3 days later, in the hallowed precinct of the Temple of the Fates. There was no track, no arena, only a single, unadorned stone archway that led into the darkness of the temple's inner sanctum. The 10 remaining aspirants stood before Queen Hippolyta, the morning sun casting long shadows behind them. The mood was far more somber than before. The easy confidence had been replaced by a tense, nervous energy. The Protector's greatest battles are not fought with a sword, the Queen announced, her voice echoing in the sacred space. They are fought within the chambers of the heart. The enemy's greatest weapon is not the spear, but the poison of fear, the venom of doubt, the ghost of regret. The trial of spirit will test your fortitude against these inner demons. You will enter the sanctum of reflection. Within, the magic of the fates will conjure a vision, a manifestation of your greatest fear or your deepest regret. You will face it, and you will overcome it, or it will break you. To pass, you must emerge from the other side, your spirit unbroken. Artemis went first. She strode into the darkness without a hint of hesitation, a warrior marching to battle. The heavy stone door swung shut behind her, sealing her in. The remaining aspirants waited in tense silence. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Some of the Amazons whispered prayers. Zealous focused on his breathing, trying to calm the frantic thrumming of his heart. What was his greatest fear? Losing his new home? The thought of his mother, alone and grieving in a world he could never return to. Nearly an hour passed before the door on the far side of the sanctum opened. Artemis emerged. Her face was pale, her knuckles white, and there was a haunted look in her eyes that Zealous had never seen before. But she was standing tall, her jaw set. She had passed. One by one, the others entered. A few emerged quickly, shaken but resolute. 2 did not emerge at all. After their allotted hour, the entrance door opened again, revealing them curled on the floor, weeping and unresponsive. They were gently carried away by the temple priestesses, their journey over. Finally, it was Zealous's turn. He took a deep breath and stepped through the archway. The door boomed shut behind him, plunging him into absolute darkness and silence. For a moment, nothing happened. He stood alone in the void, his own heart beat a deafening drum. Then, the air in front of him shimmered. The darkness bled away, replaced by the painfully familiar sight of his old apartment in Mizurifu. Every detail was perfect. The All Might posters on the wall, the scent of his mother's cooking, the specific way the afternoon light fell across his cluttered desk. It was a vision of such perfect, agonizing clarity that a sob caught in his throat. And there, sitting at the small kitchen table, was his mother, Inko Midoriya. She looked exactly as he remembered her, her green hair tied back, her face gentle and kind. But her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, and she was crying, silent tears tracing paths down her cheeks. A half-eaten bowl of katsudon, his favorite, sat untouched before her. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice breaking. She looked up, and her eyes widened. But there was no recognition in them. Only a vast, empty ocean of grief. "Maizuku," she murmured, speaking not to him, but to the empty chair across from her. "Where did you go? Did you run away? Did that villain, did he take you from me?" She clutched a worn, slightly too large t-shirt to her chest, one he recognized as his own. "Every day, I set your place at the table. Just in case. Just in case you find your way home. But it's been so long. Are you even alive, my sweet boy?" This was 1,000 times worse than any monster. This was a spear made of pure love and grief, aimed directly at the core of his soul. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to run to her, to hold her, to tell her he was alive, he was safe. But a part of him, the analytical part that had been honed by years of Amazonian discipline, recognized the illusion for what it was. This wasn't his mother. It was a magical construct born from his deepest regret, the pain his disappearance had caused her. The magic was feeding on his guilt, trying to drown him in it. He took a shaky step forward. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm here. I'm right here." The vision of his mother didn't react. She continued to stare at the empty chair, her sorrow a palpable force in the room. "I'm so sorry, Izuku," she wept, repeating the same words that had haunted him on the day he lost his dream. "I should have told you. I should have told you that you could be a hero, no matter what. Maybe if I had, you would have stayed." That was the breaking point. The raw, unadulterated guilt was too much. His knees buckled, and he fell to the floor, hot tears streaming down his face. The illusion was winning. It was pulling him under, into a sea of regret from which he might never surface. He was a terrible son. He had abandoned her. He had broken her heart. No. The thought was a tiny flicker in the storm of his emotions. No. That's not what happened. He forced himself to look up, to truly see the vision for what it was. It was a memory twisted into a weapon. I didn't abandon her, he thought, the idea taking root, growing stronger. He pushed himself to his knees, his fists clenched. I was taken. I didn't have a choice. He got to his feet, his body trembling with the effort. He faced the weeping phantom of his mother, the greatest source of love in his life, and now his greatest tormentor. "I didn't leave you," he said, his voice shaking but clear. "I was saving someone. A man was in danger and I did what a hero is supposed to do. I acted." The vision flickered, the edges of the room wavering slightly. The magic was resisting, trying to pull him back into the guilt. "I miss you," he continued, the tears flowing freely now, but they were no longer tears of despair. They were tears of acceptance, of love, of strength. "I miss you more than words can say, every single day, but I am not a ghost. I am not a memory. I am alive." He took a step forward, his resolve hardening into a shield. "I am living on an island of warrior women who took me in. They gave me a home. They gave me a purpose. I honor your memory, the memory of the love you gave me, by protecting my new family. I honor you by being the hero you were always afraid I couldn't be." He was shouting now, his voice raw, pouring all of his pain, his love, his grief, and his newfound strength into his words. "I love you, Mom," he said, his voice finally dropping to a whisper. "And I will make you proud." As he spoke those final words, the vision shattered. The apartment, his mother, the crushing weight of his sorrow, it all dissolved like smoke, leaving him once again in the silent, empty darkness of the sanctum. Across the room, a door of light appeared. The exit. He was emotionally flayed, utterly drained, but his spirit was not broken. It had been tested in the cruelest fire imaginable, and had emerged stronger, tempered into steel. He walked toward the light, his steps steady, and emerged into the brilliant Themysciran sun. The final trial was combat. The 8 remaining aspirants, zealous among them, to the continued astonishment of the entire island, were gathered in the Gia's courtyard, the same arena where he and Artemis had so often sparred. The mood was electric. This was the trial the Amazons understood best, the one they had been born and bred for. It was a series of non-lethal duels, decided by first surrender or incapacitation. The pairings were drawn by lot. Zealous's first opponent was Talia, a fast, agile warrior who specialized in twin daggers. He had spent years watching her, filling pages of his notebooks with her movements. He knew she relied on overwhelming her opponents with a flurry of strikes, leaving them no room to think. So he didn't try to match her speed. He fought defensively, using a large, heavy shield he was barely strong enough to wield. He weathered her initial storm of attacks, the daggers ringing off his shield like angry wasps. He didn't try to strike back. He just watched. And waited. After several minutes of furious, fruitless attacks, Talia's movements became a fraction slower, her breathing a little more ragged. She was growing frustrated. As she lunged in for another attack, she overcommitted, leaving her right foot planted for a split second too long. It was the opening he had been waiting for. Zealous didn't counterattack. He simply dropped his shield and lunged forward, hooking his foot behind her ankle and pushing his shoulder into her chest. It was the same clumsy, effective tackle he had tried on Artemis, but Talia lacked Artemis's raw power to counter it. She went down in a surprised heap, and before she could recover, Zealous had the blunt edge of his practiced sword pressed against her throat. She surrendered, her face a mask of disbelief. His second match was against Myrine, a powerhouse who wielded a heavy battle-axe. To fight her head-on would be suicide. Instead, Zealous led her on a chase around the arena. He dodged and weaved, never staying in one place for more than a second. Myrine, enraged by his evasiveness, began to swing her axe in wide, reckless arcs. Zealous had analyzed the physics of her weapon. A heavy axe, once swung, carried immense momentum that was difficult to redirect. He timed it perfectly. As she swung in a massive horizontal arc, he ducked under the blow and, as the axe head passed over him, he grabbed the haft with both hands. Using her own momentum, he vaulted up, kicking off her chest and using the axe as a lever to flip clean over her head. He landed behind her, as she stumbled forward, off balance from the force of her own swing. He swept her legs out from under her, and the match was his. The crowd, which had been preparing to watch him be swiftly and brutally dispatched, was now murmuring with a confused, grudging respect. He wasn't winning with strength or skill. He was winning with his mind. He was turning his opponent's greatest strengths into their greatest weaknesses. And then the final pairing of the round was announced. Zealous versus Artemis. A hush fell over the arena. This was it. The scholar versus the captain. The master against the student. The foregone conclusion. Artemis strode to the center of the arena, her red hair like a banner of war. She held a practiced sword and a shield, her expression one of utter, lethal seriousness. This was not a training spar. She saw his advancement through the trials as an insult to their traditions, and she was going to make an example of him. Zealous took his position, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He had studied her for 6 years. He knew her every feint, every parry, every favored attack. But knowing what was coming and being able to stop it were two entirely different things. The horn blew. Artemis did not charge. She advanced slowly, methodically, her shield high, her sword ready. She was giving him no openings, no reckless moves to exploit. She was going to dissect him with pure, perfect technique. Zealous knew his only chance was to break that perfection. He charged first, screaming a raw, ragged war cry. It was a bluff, a desperate attempt to throw her off her rhythm. It didn't work. She met his charge with perfect form, her shield absorbing the impact of his own, her sword simultaneously disarming him in a single, fluid motion. His blade went skittering across the dust. He was unarmed in the first 3 seconds of the match. The crowd groaned. This was going to be a massacre, but Zealous hadn't planned on winning with his sword. As his sword flew away, he dropped his shield and lunged, not at her, but past her, rolling in the dust to retrieve his blade. Artemis was on him in an instant, her sword descending in a vicious arc. He barely managed to get his own sword up in time, the impact jarring his arms to the shoulder. The fight was brutal. It wasn't a duel, it was a punishment. Artemis was overwhelmingly stronger, faster, and more skilled. She drove him back across the arena, her blows relentless. He parried, he dodged, he blocked, his body screaming in protest. He was a leaf in a hurricane, surviving moment to moment on pure instinct and years of ingrained analysis of her movements. He saw an opening, a flicker of an instant where her guard was low, and lunged. His blade slipped past her shield and scored a dull, thudding blow against her armored hip. The crowd gasped. He had actually landed a hit. The blow only served to enrage her. Her attacks doubled in ferocity. A pommel strike to the side of his head sent him staggering, his vision swimming with stars. A kick to his chest knocked the wind from his lungs and sent him sprawling onto his back. Artemis stood over him, her sword point at his throat. "Surrender," she commanded, her voice low and dangerous. Zealous looked up at her, his head ringing, his body a symphony of pain. He could taste blood in his mouth. Surrender was the logical choice. He had proven his point. He had made it to the final trial, landed a blow on their greatest champion. There was no shame in admitting defeat, but as he looked up, he saw the faces in the crowd. He saw Philippus, her expression unreadable. He saw Hippolyta, watching him with that same unnerving calm. And he thought of his vision in the temple. He thought of his promise to his mother, to be a hero. A hero doesn't give up. No, he rasped, spitting a mouthful of bloody dust onto the ground. With a roar of pure, desperate will, he kicked upward, not at her, but at the hand holding her sword. His foot connected with her wrist, not hard enough to injure her, but enough to spoil her aim. As her sword point wavered, he scrambled away, getting back to his feet, his body screaming in protest. He raised his sword, his stance wobbly and pathetic, but unbroken. Artemis stared at him, her eyes wide with a flicker of disbelief. He was beaten. He was broken. And he was still standing. Why? She demanded, her frustration boiling over. Why won't you just stay down? 'Cause I can still move, he wheezed, channeling the words of a hero from a world away. He charged again. And again, she put him down. And again, he got back up. He became a force of nature, an embodiment of pure, unyielding spirit. He couldn't win. He knew that, but he would absolutely, unequivocally, refuse to lose. The fight devolved into a grim spectacle. He was no longer trying to land blows. He was just enduring, forcing himself to his feet through sheer willpower every time she knocked him down. The crowd had fallen completely silent. They were no longer watching a duel. They were witnessing something far more profound. They were watching the forging of a spirit in real time. Finally, after knocking him down for what must have been the 10th time, Artemis stood over his battered, bruised body, breathing heavily herself. He was a mess of scrapes and bruises, one eye swollen shut, but he was already pushing himself up onto his elbows. Artemis looked down at him, then up at the silent, awestruck crowd, and then at the queen. A complex series of emotions washed over her face: frustration, anger, grudging respect, and finally, a deep and weary understanding. She had won the physical battle from the first second. But she had lost the war of wills. To continue beating him now would be a hollow, cruel victory. He had proven his point in the most painful, undeniable way possible. She lowered her sword and stepped back. Enough, she said, her voice filled with a strange, new tone of respect. She looked down at him, the boy she had called scholar, the boy she had dismissed as a weakling. The match is yours. She turned and offered her hand to help him up. As Zealous, battered and broken but spiritually whole, took her hand, he knew that even if he didn't win the tournament, he had already won something far more important: the respect of the Amazons.